The music in this game is amazing. So, hello everyone, here goes time finally for a deep review, super detailed, of everything Meta 4 ReFantazio. Honestly, I was hoping to do this review earlier this year, but the game is just really long. It's about 100 hours to beat the whole game and get everything in the game, and all trophies and everything. But it definitely was worth my time, right? So, when I make review, guys, I like to do them really in detail. So in this video here, we're gonna go over everything in the game. The combat system, the leveling system, the dating/friend system, the storyline, the art. And I'm going to talk about, is this game of the year, right? I would like to say immediately that this game, of course, is very similar to Persona 5 and other Persona games. So if you're like me, a big fan of Persona 5, you will love this game, like straight up. Right? It's basically Persona 6, but it's a fantasy world instead of modern time, right? Combat system also very similar, but especially the general like dating system, meeting characters, different days and so on, right? Very similar. So in this video, it will not be any spoilers. I will only talk about the mechanics, right? Until, of course, we get to the story review part at the end of the video. Otherwise, I'll talk about the premise and explain what is the game, right? What it's about and so on. Just give you kind of the demo feel, basically, right? And then we're going to go into the archetypes and combat system. That'll probably be the longest part of the video, because this I, as a combat game designer, can really speak a lot about stuff, right? The art, which is crazy in this game, and of course also the soundtrack. And then again, lastly, discussing the actual story bits of the game, right? But anyway, let's talk about the basic premise. Okay, so the very basic premise in the game is Persona, but with fantasy stuff, right? I mean, honestly, it is what it is. But first of all, then, the game, of course, has like elves and ogres and dwarves or whatever, right? I do think it's kind of funny, though, that the game actually doesn't ever use those typical terms. So, for example, Hulkenberg is clearly a typical elf lady, but they call her like something else, like Rostente, like for some reason. And Birgitta is clearly a dark elf, or she's something else. You're like, come on, this is a clear dark elf, yeah. So it's kind of funny, but basically you have a world of different races, and they all hate, so right, they all hate each other. In this game, it's a lot about this like conflict between the different, magical people in this world, right? However, the main character has this book. This book is about a fantasy world, which of course is our planet and Earth, right? Where the author is like, oh, on this planet they only had one race, the human race. They were all best friends, you know what I mean? Which of course is kind of weird way to look at it, because obviously on Earth, in reality we actually do fight. But at least for them then, they would be an interesting world, right? Because they have like 20 different medical races, like again, elves and dwarves and so on. But of course in our world we only have humans, right? So they think, oh, there would be no wars then, because, only humans. And the main character's goal then is, of course, kind of unite different races, right? But also mainly trying to save the prince. So the game's very basic story bit is that the prince, the actual heir to the throne, was cursed long before the game started, and you have to basically kill the person that cursed him, which is Lewis then, the game's main antagonist. And without doing that, the prince will die, at any time, basically, right? So that's kind of the very... I don't want to spoil here, but it's like the first 10 minutes of the game storyline, right? So basically, okay, we have to save the prince and then try to unite the different races. After into the game, you start this race. So the race part of the game is kind of interesting, I think, actually from a game mechanic standpoint. So basically, right, the next king has to be voted by everyone in the whole planet then, right? Or all the people in this world or whatever. And you, of course, start really low, because you're like the most hated race, Elda. Everyone hates the Eldas, right? Or top bottom race. And then you have to, the more quests you do, the people you help, right, the more you get votes, of course. And there's a bunch of different like opponents. Obviously then the Pope leader, Fodran, is the main leader in the game, and also then of course Louis, the main antagonist. But there are also a bunch of other like competitors, and they basically are like mini bosses which you can fight if you want to. You can see them on the mini-map, you can go at them and so on, so I like that. But what I generally like with this system actually is that it kind of gives you like a nice feedback. So basically, right, you help some children with like, oh, my friend needs help or something, I want to buy her like a flower. Okay, so you get the flower to the kid, right, gives him the flower, and then he, asks this girl out, right. And after that, that's the quest, right. now you get 2 more votes. So the game constantly shows you how many people basically like you at the current state, right? More or less. Of course, you kind of like, if you beat a big boss, it jumps several thousand spots maybe. So it's a little bit undefined how the game actually works. But basically, I kind of like actually the feedback, because it means like, oh, I did this tiny quest for the children. Yeah, of course they're voting for me now. Or I had this old lady, or she voted for me now, right? So I like that. It gives a good feedback to it. But a problem though is it's very, very, of course, rigid. You clearly cannot actually get it up much better. There's one thing you can do in the game, which is do like speeches. If you're doing that, you get more charisma, basically, one of your main stats. But you also get more, like, voters then, by doing, you know, like, democratical, you know, demonstrations, whatever. But by doing that, you can get, like, your votes up faster, right, than playing the storyline. But eventually, you get stuck. So, the system is good, but it's not perfect. I think there's honestly a little bit of feel overall in the game. We're gonna go into more stuff now, but I think that, yeah, it's a little bit like, it's like, okay, what's the point after a while then when you can't like increase your position anyway? You have to play the main story, you know what I mean? But otherwise, talk about some other part of the game than the actual like general like city part of the game. So if you never played this game before, it might sound kind of confusing, but like I mentioned earlier, if you played Persona games or similar Atlus games, you know exactly what I'm talking about here, right? So basically, every day in the game, you can do 2 different things, right? So on the morning and on the day, you can go on a date with someone, or you can improve your stats, or whatnot, make some money, etc. Right? Or you can then go to a dungeon. If you go to a dungeon, it does consume the whole day, both like day and evening part. But if you don't do a dungeon, you can do 2 different things, right? So the main thing then, of course, with this gameplay here, is you run around the city, right? And you have a bunch of different characters who you can basically go on dates with, or do a hobby whatever. And talk about the romance part later. Persona games are known to kind of romantically have the cast, right? And this game doesn't have romance per se, but it kind of does. So again, I'll talk about later in the video. But basically, you have 20 different characters you can take out on dates, and then you get more love meter with them, right? Or you can do stuff like fighting in the Colosseum or whatnot, right? So you get some extra side stuff going on. But you can basically see here you have a date, and every time in the game then you have like, for example, oh, you have 10 days on you, and in these 10 days you have to do X things, and on the last day you have to beat the newest boss in the story mode, right? If you don't do that, the game is over. But you can actually go and fight the boss before that. And actually, I'll say it immediately, in this game, it actually is preferred to go and fight the boss as soon as you can, the main story boss, because if you're doing that, you will still have the amount of days left. Basically, right, you have 10 days, fight the boss on the first day, then all the 9 days, you will have more story bits with you. So some of the main story boss things will give you new characters and also new archetypes, which is the class in the game. So if you do it immediately, you actually have access to more dates and more story bits. So I think in Persona games, I was this opposite, where you kind of want to do the main story fights as late as possible. Here I would say you actually want to do it as early as possible, it's a side step. But regardless, the game is about this thing here, Dragon City, trying to manage different relationships and so on. And just like in the previous games, right, if you date your main cast, your playable characters, they will get stronger in battle, unlock some passives, and maybe get some new class ability or whatnot. Where if you date some other character, like the merchant, or the traders, or like all the side characters, they will unlock passives for your whole team, or maybe like increase your XP gain, or you might get better items, or cheaper items, and so on for that, like discounts and so on. And this is why I think the game really shines immediately. Again though, same thing with Persona games and so forth, right? Is that this game has a lot of meaningful choices. So what do I mean with meaningful choices? Well, I think one thing the metaphor does so well, right? And I keep saying it, but I have to iterate about it. This is, again though, like the previous dating game has done in the past though. So not special in this game per se, but it's a recurring great game mechanic for this game and similar games, right? So what it does then, again, this is called meaningful choices, is that every day when you play this game, it's really enjoyable, because constantly you have to think, well, who should I date now? Birgitta, then I get better merchant powers, but if I go with the healer, then I get like more XP, and I need to do this thing, and how do I plan it out perfectly so I can do X amount of stuff per day, right? On the same time, it's like I need to do the dungeons before they go past, because different timelines. And it's like, oh, but if I do this dungeon, then I get more base stat, and you need to have some base stat like courage to do something like David Birgitta. So if I do that dungeon first, then David Birgitta, then the next day I can get this thing and so forth. But maybe I want to go with Maria first and help her get friends, because with Maria you get more XP, permanently more XP gain. That's more meaningful, right? So constantly every day in this game is meaningful. I love it, meaningful. Because you have to always think, what should I do now, right? What should I prioritize? And you cannot get every character immediately. You cannot get everyone to max like happiness immediately. You can't do all the damage immediately. You have to always pick a thing, right? It's exactly Persona 5 one. Constantly have to consider, what should I do right now, right? So again, very, very me choices, and that makes every day in the game feels like, purposeful, right? And it gives you that kind of like one more turn feel, where you have to think, okay, I do this thing, then I go and date with her, then I do this little bonus thing, and then I get a little more happiness, a little more courage, then I can go and date with her, then I get like this archetype, then expedite that thing. So it's very, very addictive, honestly, right? Do this kind of quests and so on. However, I also have one thing immediately, so more later in the video, but this actually, I think this game fails though. So, while it's a great game, a reason I don't think it's a 10 out of 10 game, honestly, is also here immediately, because the biggest flaw in this game, I argue for the biggest flaw immediately, I don't know, it's also on the premise here, but the biggest flaw is probably that, like I said earlier, you have like 10 days, then have 12 days, they have 15 days, 20 days, etc. per like session of before end bosses, but eventually in the game, you have way too many days. Eventually, in this game, you have like 25 days or whatever. And at that time, you almost have already Romans ever onto the max one. So the meaningful choices are gone, right? Because in the last part of the game, the very end, I only needed maybe like 4 or 5 days to maximize the last few characters, romance with me, right? So the other 20 days, I don't do really. So I was like, oh, the meaningful choices are gone, kinda, right? So in a one way, I like it that, unlike Persona, where you have to do everything perfectly min-max, and yet you will have a very hard time getting the horror ending in that game. Super hard, even if you do it perfectly. This game gives you a lot more leeway, and I liked that. I like a little more leeway, but I think the issue is they give it too much leeway, so it was too easy to maximize current relationships for several months. Then again, the 2 last months just felt way too easy. And again, it removed a lot of the meaningful choices, right? So that's what actually a big issue with the game. In the game then, you have dungeons, right? What we're currently doing right now here is a tower dungeon. This is an optional dungeon and not an actual main story dungeon. I bring it up because, as I explained earlier, right, it's quite important to understand also for a basic concept for example combat and so on. That is that you can do these dungeons whenever you want in the day. So you can see the final date now, 15 more days, and you can do one of these towers then before those 15 days. At the last, you have to go and fight the story boss. Now, while you are in a dungeon, you can see all the enemies. It's not a random encounter game, and you can fight them beforehand, like in many games, right? To get like a premium attack, hit them in the back, and then you get this bonus thing, right? So you can like get a bonus attack. And here's something that the game is very interesting on, and that is that it's very, very important to get this thing. And I've seen a lot of people comment about this thing, and I agree generally. So, thing is that if the enemy gets you right in a backstab, you will basically be screwed. They will like kill you, especially if you play on hard mode, which of course I played the whole game on hard mode every on hard mode, and then I played again on the extra hard mode. But anyway, like basically, if you play on even on hard and especially on super hard thing, if the opponent gets you in a in a backstab and ambush, you will like die. Like all the characters will die immediately, basically. And the opposite kind of is true for you, right? Like I can kill all my enemies before they can move. So I agree with that. I think the game has an issue with that. Honestly, it's a little bit like you have to very carefully get this thing in right. So it's very important to land those backstab things. You can also go from the front of the enemy. You can avoid them. So they attack you right. So now if they get me instead, like I will basically die now. Like this is crazy. So I have to say immediately, I found these things just kind of weirdly because it's very, very like one-sided. Either you get an amazing start on enemies, or they get an amazing start at you. It's basically kind of back and forth there. You also get more XP if you like defeat them and take damage on. Your allies will fight them as well, the AI. And if you're too high level, then you should die at this. This balding here will just die now. Yeah, so if you're too high level, they will just immediately get defeated. And one thing I see immediately before we talk about the combat in more details is that if you can fight an enemy and defeat immediately like that, That's a way better XP farm than anything else in the game. There are these crystals that will spawn enemies, and if you're high enough level, so you will one-shot when they're spawning, especially the end of the game, you can stand there for like an hour, you just like farm and get like 10 levels in like an hour. You just hit these enemies over and over again, yeah. So it's kind of weird in the game, because if you can like one-shot like this, right, you will get so much more XP than actually just having an actual fight, because of course if you can kill an enemy in one attack, right, it goes way faster than having to do a battle, even if the enemy might give you slightly lower XP than a normal fight is. However, and I say this immediately, guys, for premise here, it is important to do this thing a lot in the game. You definitely want to, in the build game, grind a lot, because you want to reach those levels. You want to reach the levels so you can start watching them. And if you change your archetype class, comes soon in the game, that is, you will have different attacks with the main character. So now I have the staff, the worst one, the healer staff, super bad. If you have the range one, you can shoot it down from distance. It's super broken, so it's also part of the game. Now, what about the actual combat then in the game, right? And then we get to the archetypes. Archetype will be the longest part of the video. There are a lot about different like classes and so on. But when I say archetype, you basically mean class, right? It's the same thing. I use respawn the enemies. Okay, so you're gonna fight the enemy now. These are weak against like ice, for example. So the game is a lot about weakness. If you look now, right, you have demonic beast 4. It's weak against ice. It will say nullify fire, and it will resist darkness. They also might have another icon, which is reflect, which is the worst, where they repel it back to you, right? And the game is a lot about this thing. So you can see that I have 1 turn per character, 3 crystals up in the left corner, right? And here the gameplay is a lot very focused on thing. So if I now use an ice magic, so use my ice ability here now, and so I have 3 crystals now, I will gain like a tiny crystal now. So see, the tiny one, right? So basically, as long as you do the weakness abilities, you get another turn. But not exactly, because 1 big turn and 1 small turn are equally good. So if you just want to attack with your turn, it's basically the same thing. But if you do like if you do like a swap, for example, if you swap characters, I'm gonna do it here because I will spoil your party members now. But if you swap characters, you have more than your starter characters, and if you do that, right, that will cost you half a crystal basically. So if I will swap now, Stroll will just lose that turn. So if he attacks now, it doesn't matter, right? But if I swap now instead, the swapped character basically will also have a turn to attack. So half crystals and full crystals are not the same thing. And all the stuff like you can pass like this, right? Then you see again I lose half a turn, right? So it's very important to understand when you should do stuff depending on half turns and full turns. I like it. It's a good system. It makes most abilities like swapping, passing turn, this kind of like, I'm just gonna like, yeah, they are very useful to have a full crystal on. And when you have a tiny crystal, again, you basically want to attack or heal, right? And if you do then, like I said, if you do the weakness ability on the enemies, you basically will unlock half a turn, right? And as a side note, it's important, I think, in the game, early game at least, to actually buy these different element items. So early in the game, right, you only have a few archetypes. Archetype, again, the class comes soon, but basically you don't have all the elements. So you can pretty easily actually buy different items. And it's very good to just throw, oh, I need like fire now, I need like electric now, you know. Just throw the enemies and get more turns and so on. It's very useful early game, and late game not very much, but they do like static damage. They never do less than what it says. So they can't resist items, it always does the exact same thing, so actually it's somewhat useful even late game. And this one archetype that doubles the value of the item then. Now, if you pass here now, we can see for the enemies it's the same thing. They also have a number of turns, right? Now they're stunned because we ambushed them, so they just lose their turn for stunning here. And this is also a very big part of the game. So for example, if you attack into something that is like failed, basically if these enemies are fire immune, so if I go into a fireball at them, right? You can see the cross there, yeah. This now costs more turns, look at that. I lost 2 turns now instead of 1 turn. So I like this a lot. It's very much like if you do a mistake, you lose 1 turn, and if you do the proper thing, you gain 1 turn, right? So by attacking these 5 dogs with fire, I lost 2 turns. If I attack them with ice instead, I gain a turn, right? Or half a turn, technically speaking. And the same thing goes for the enemies. So a large part of the game, especially with Hulkenberg, your tank lady, she can repel stuff. she can guard stuff, she can protect you and so on. So this goes for enemies as well. So if the enemy attacks you with like a fire ability and you can repel fire, they will then lose like 2 turns. Or if you're immune to like hit and slash, pierce or strike, and they attack you with that, they will lose turn on that. So you can actually, this is a very important part of the game later on, especially late game, and mid to late game, but especially last bosses, to use your own like repelling and nullifying, guarding and so on, right? Because the bosses of course will have more and more turns, they will have like 20 turns in the end. But you can see now a blocked ability, they will lose 2 turns, right? So controlling that is very, very important, but again 2 turns, they lost 2 turns. So it's a lot about that element, right? It's very, very important to kind of manage that. Now in the Persona games, when you play them, the main character, example Joke then, Persona 5, he can change of course personas, right? So you have much different personas, and by changing persona, you can unlock like, you know, fire, ice, or water, or something like that, whatever, it's like mental, but whatever, you unlock different elements basically. In this game instead, you have archetypes. So it's not exactly the same persona, but it feels similar. Like, oh, I want to use Ice Magic now, right? I can't transform into like an ice persona, an ice demon to use Ice Magic. But then I can swap character, and that character can be an elemental master archetype, which can use Ice Magic. So it is still kind of similar, but a little more limited for your protagonist, certainly so. But it is much less limited for your party members. When I swapped character, right, and using this ability for a massive ice ability. Now, here I think the game is actually much better than Persona games. And serious that. So you play Persona 5, you play like the remake, or Persona 3 and so on, right? You know what I'm talking about. Basically, the main character in those games, as I mentioned, can swap between these like 100 different personas, right? You can't have all of them with you, but you have a selected number of them, and then you can, you know, get more of them. And that's a big part of the games. In those games, you unlock new personas by, you know, fighting them and basically Pokemon and getting them, so on, right? And then you swap around. But this game instead, I think it's a much better system, honestly. I think it's much better archetype system than the Persona system, because here instead every character, his Stroll then is your first playable companion, he will start with a warrior, and then you sure you have better sword or whatever, but if you want he can be a commander, or he can be a mage or whatever, right? And he can be a faker, and he can be a brawler, and he can be a knight and so on. So this is a much better game system just straight up, right? Because basically in Persona 5 you will have every character is having their own, you know, 4 or 5 skills, right, that they have. You can never change that. And if you want to have like, oh, I want to have like an electric party member now, then you swap in that character, right? So you can still have a lot of swapping and so on, but basically the protagonist has to do everything. The protagonist has all the power. Here instead, it's kind of like every character has their, you know, 10 different personas, right? They can be, sure, this is more limited for the protagonist, because you don't have that many different personas or archetype then. They're basically just classes, right? They are classes like, you know, commander, warrior, thief and so on. So there are obviously fewer of them, but it makes us a lot more combinations, right? Because you can combine it with every different character. It means that you can have, for example, 4 warriors, you can have 4 mages if you want to, right? Or you can have, you know, 3 healers and this thing, so on and so forth, right? So you have way more combos, way more interesting interaction between different characters, and I think it makes the gameplay a lot better, honestly. It's a lot more freedom, right? It reminds me of a bunch of other games. It's just straight up better, I think, than having just only having the main character having different options. Now that being said, the other mechanics too. So for example then, if we go to my so let's go to commander, warrior, whatever, play the most. You can see here, when I'm going to samurai, minor spoiler then, yes, you have the samurai class. I have skills down here that I can unlock, right, from other classes or archetypes then. I might use the word class a lot because it's exactly right archetype, but so I can like unlock this ability here from commander, and I can move it down there. I can unlock ability here from warrior and buy it and move it into commander, because here costs then mag is your resource for buying new archetypes or archetype skills, right? And you can see here, for example, if you unlock the berserker, you need to be both a warrior, a brawler, and a knight, right? And then if you want to be the next, you have to be like 20. So it's always like first get this thing to level 20, and then there's usually another requirement for that. So for example, 20 become pugilist. But if you want to be, let's see, the Dark Knight, what is it there? you need to have Wizard and Magic Knight, right? Different levels. So it's not completely free, but this makes sense though, overall. There's one character, mostly Hulkenberg, that has a weird tree, I think. But most of the character kind of makes sense. So for Stroll then, it's mostly like warrior commander for his like main strain warrior build up here, right? And so forth, right? So you have options. Every class, of course, has different abilities, and they have different elements. And like I said, you can buy the skills. You can have your warrior with like fireball. If you play the mage, you can go into mage, right? You can unlock bot or Kande, whatever, and you can level it up down here, right? So a lot of possibilities, especially early game. This is very, very fun because early game you swap around a little bit, you level up a little bit, and you move skills around, so you can have the different weaknesses. Talked about, right? You have to throw the weakness spell, so you might level up mage first, a little bit of seeker, so you get the wind magic here, you combine that with dark magic from and so forth, right? So that's really fun, and there's specific builds and so on. And overall, this is a really good system. Now, one thing I haven't mentioned yet, but I bring it up now then, is that this system is unlocked by either the main characters being recruitable or your friends, supporters in cities. So I mentioned earlier, right, like in the other similar game of this, you have your dating world, right, where you run around the city and pick up people and so on. What's different in this game than the previous games is that every character in this game is represented by one of these archetypes. So first of all, Warrior then is Stroll's archetype, right? So he's obviously a character you unlock, play the game for like an hour, he will join your party very early. And then Hulkenberg will join. So these two are like the first two very early party member recruits, right? And she's a knight then, he's a warrior, and they basically have like a story beat, right? And then they will unlock their power. So then you get the tree basically. And this is true for every character. So some of these archetypes, for example, the Berserker is locked behind getting pretty far into the game, right? It's like 50 hours into the game to get the Berserker, right? And Faker instead is a supporter. So Faker then is where you unlock from one of the people in the towns, right? And I like it because if I compare it again to like Persona or so forth, in that game it isn't as important to befriend some of the supportive cast. You probably do want to get them all right, you want a harm ending and whatnot, but there are a bunch of support I think in those games where you kind of like, well, this guy only gave me these pass abilities I don't care about, so whatever, right? But in this game instead, it's like, no, you need to befriend everyone, at least for one level, to get the archetype then, right? And then you need to get maximized level, usually with them, to get the next thing, right? So you want the trickster, you need to get like 8 out of 8 friendship with the person that is the faker, right? Or so you can unlock it. And also you have to have the person in the game being level 20 faker to be a trickster. So it's very important to kind of maximize everyone's cities. And I like it too because I mentioned earlier with the meaningful choices that is like, well, not only is it like, oh, I want to like level up these characters' friendship because they give me better XP or this thing, but also like, well, I kind of rather want to go with my party member on date now, but if I date this merchant lady, then I will like Tycoon, so I guess I'm gonna go with her instead for this day. I only have one more day before the boss fight, but I think I want to be able to unlock this thing because sometimes in this game, you definitely get stuck behind not having actually enough friendship, basically, right? So like, oh, I can't actually unlock Samurai, even if I'm 20 here and 20 here and 20 here and so on, because I have to get Stroll to level 7, or for friendship, right? So I'm level 5 now in friendship. So I like that a lot, because it gives even more, as I said, meaningful choices. Who should I befriend first and so forth, right? Like I said, of course in endgame you basically have maximized everyone anyway, but early and mid game is actually quite important who you befriend in what order and so on, right? Because you will otherwise be not permanent, of course, then, but at least temporarily locked out of certain classes until you kind of like get it further into the game and so on. Because you can only go on number of dates per month, right, and so on. So you can certainly be. You have to basically pick what class you want to unlock early game and mid game, absolutely. Which again, I think is a great part of the game, right? And also makes it more meaningful. There is like capturing a random persona monster, basically. Here it's like, oh, I have to play Warlord, then I have to go with this. I want to spoil it, but this is a man in the game. You have to like befriend him, and you have to do like a mini boss fight, blah blah so forth, to get the Warlord, right? So it's like a lot of that stuff you think about, which again is really good. Another part, of course, is that some of the archetypes give you permanently more bonuses. For example, Merchant gives you debt collection. Mag is what you're paying to get new skills. So I, for example, maximized Merchant immediately, which is great because then you get debt collection faster, right? And then you get more lucky finds, like more items per fight and so on. So certain classes or archetypes, we call it, will also improve like your XP gain or your money gain or your item gain and so on, right? So there's a bunch of different choices in that as well. Same thing as I mentioned, of course, with your supporters. Some of them will increase your XP or money gain and so on. So there's a bunch of these different combinations of what should I do now, right? Again, the game has a lot of meaningful choices early and mid game, which is really good. And of course, there's a bunch of different combos, right? So for example, if you look at Tycoon, then you got Almighty boost. Almighties are abilities that just ignore everything. They can never be like good against anything. No one is like weak against All Might, but it also just hits through all shields, right? But here's that, Tycoon gives you bonus Almighty. Then you go to like Royal Warrior and Commander. Here you get like Almighty AoE spells and so on. So you can kind of combine them interestingly enough. And there's a lot of cool combos. Pugilis is health based, and then you can do another character health based and so on, right? The Gunner is elemental based. The last one, Dragoon, is more elemental spells. So you can improve that with that stuff, etc. It's a lot of interesting options and combos there. And having beaten the game, my first playthrough, I didn't even use all the different archetypes. I didn't use much of Soul Hacker. I think Seekers are really weak archetype though. I didn't really use Warlock. I have it on main character for a while, but didn't use it that much. Didn't barely use the like Dark Knight and so on. So there's a bunch of options you can use and so forth, right? However, that also brings us to the tier list. I love tier list. No, but the bad stuff with archetype though. There's one thing which is a massive issue with archetypes, and you probably know what I'm coming to. It's up here, I'm coming to that later. But first of all, there is one clear issue though. For example then, the main character starts as Seeker. This is a pointless class, okay? Like, why would you ever use one? There's a problem with archetypes almost from the beginning though, which is not a big deal early game, but it obviously is very clear late game. That is that some of the archetypes are definitely not equally good. So for example, Seeker then. Seeker, you get some little healing spells, and you get a little bit of wind spells, okay? It's like wind and healing. But if you get healer instead, healer mostly gets like, debuffs. You can remove different debuffs. You get light spells and healing spells, right? So it's much better being a savior. Then you get like a really powerful, like extreme heavy light attack instead of having like mediocre wind, because most abilities in the game, especially early game, no one basically early game is light immune, right? Most enemies are either weak against fire, lightning, not lightning, or ice, and no one is like light immune, like holy magic. So holy magic is much better than wind magic. Certainly in one dungeon everyone's like a bird, so then Seek is better. But for most dungeons, being holy magic with healing is better than wind magic with healing, right? And overall, mage is much better than either of them early game, because then you have the three different elements, right? So the game is kind of weird like that. Early game mage is by far the superior like spellcaster build, because most enemies will have at least one weakness against these three, where here you only have one element each, right? And like for example, then they use the fight doesn't have any elements, they use fight stuff, so this will damage, right? So that's kind of weird in the game. So I like never use Seeker, which we start with. I immediately threw it away. I was mage instead, and then also like healer with main characters. Like, what would I have to be Seeker for? So that's pretty clear. And the same thing goes for kind of all the stuff like, why would you be a Dark Knight when you can be a Paladin instead? It's just better. Warlock is like dark magic mostly, but then you have Elemental Master, which again got a bunch of different spells, right? So you basically only pick Warlock for the passives, like you want to have the max MP and so on. So it is a weird in that sense though. Of course, when you maximize an archetype, when you get to level 20 of it, you turn into a master, you get also bonus stats, right? So end game, it's worth it, for example, to like maximize everything. If I max this in here, I'm gonna get more health. This thing is more health every time. So if I want Stroll to have like 100 more health points, I can like max this one and get like 50 health points or 35 whatever per level, something like that. So it's worth maximizing everything now. And one thing I really like though, this is one thing I really like in this game, is that when you maximize someone's archetype, the class, example warrior, to level 20. After that, you get 1000 XP, and then you get level 21, but basically you can say it's master anyway. But when you do that, you get an item. This item can be used on anyone. So this is a really good system actually. I think I really love system because what it means is that late game, right, you don't want to swap your archetypes. Because it is valuable to like maximize every archetype because you get bonus stats, right? But I don't want to go down from playing a Royal Warrior to play a pugilist. It's gonna be a massive, downgrade, right? But because when I master Royal Warrior, I'm gonna get then XP, like excess XP will become items, right? So I can stay as my best class, my current best class, and use those items to level up the other weaker classes for the like passive stuff. So that's a really good system, and especially really late game because everyone can do the same thing. So you can use like everyone can be in the like basic master thing and all characters, right? And then you defeat the boss, you get like 20 of those items. Then someone else can like jump 20 levels immediately. So late game is very easy to say, oh, I want Stroll to be like 20 mage levels. Bam, one fight, you can jump up there. So it's really good actually. I love that system. You gain like 1000 XP item every time you like over level your character. So whereas we'd be forced to play like really lower level, much weaker classes on end enemies, which we would really struggle with. So that's a really good system. Honestly, I love the system. Very good game mechanic. I wish more games have done that. I mean, how many games doesn't have like multi-classing, multi-swapping and so on, right? But usually you have to of course play that class, right? But here instead you kind of get away with it, and you can even put other characters like that into that. So it makes like leveling different dual classes really easily, and I hope more games will have this kind of system in the future. It's a very good system, and what more can I say about it? Well, it fits again that everyone can do archetypes, right? So everyone can like together unite and level up. So it's really good. It's really good. Now though, this really ruined this system though. It's very unfortunate, but I think the system is much better than the pro system overall. But endgame, it has a terrible extra mechanic, which is very necessary, and it ruins the system. So, what you see here, right, is the Royal Warrior. So Royal Warrior is basically a super version of Warrior, which is Stroll's starting archetype, and then also a combination with some of the commander abilities. It's basically the 4th level of Warrior. No one else has 4th Warriors, they only have 3. And every character has one each Royal version, right? This Royal version is clearly the best class per character. So everything about this like combination, I can be this thing and that thing, or I can combine healing and this thing, all of that is bullshit, because endgame, everyone is gonna be the Royal version. I mean, seriously, it's very annoying to me, because it basically means that there's just no purpose thinking about, what should Stroll be? Should I combine Pugilist and Commander? No, should I be a Commander? Should I be a Warrior? Should I be a Ninja? Should I be a Samurai? No, should I be a Gunner? All that is pointless, right? End of the game, every character, like I said, will unlock their own Royal version of their first class they had, first archetype they had, and it's just so much better. It's just like brokenly much better, right? So if you don't use the archetype, like, what are you doing? There are certainly certain like super weird like All Might builds or whatever. Of course there are like some super extreme builds you can do with other characters. Of course they exist. But overall it's like either you use some very niche build, right? Where, I level up all this stuff so I have every fire, blah blah blah. No. But normally it's like, no, you're gonna use the Royal version of your starting thing, right? And it's just, again, so much better. You basically get all the previous stuff you had, right? And it combines into your other archetype automatically. And it has like a better version of whatever you started with. It has a better, if it has like a fireball, it has like, double fireball now, right? If you had a passive saying like 10% more physical damage, it has 20% now then as the royal thing, right? It's always just way better. And they also have this very power passive too, where they have to regain their turn if they do a correct kill or and so on. And this AoE is crazy and so on. So you always have way better stuff. And it means basically all of this stuff, like, should I combine this thing with that thing or this thing with that thing? Like I said, it all kind of evaporates when you get this thing. And you unlock them, what can it be? Maybe 80% or so in the game. It's a story mode thing. And it's just annoys me so much, right? Because it just kind of removes everything you did before that. Now, to unlock this ability, you have to actually do certain stuff here. So you can see here on Hulkenberg, you need to have 15 Dark Knight, 15 Element Master, and 20 Paladin. So certainly, to unlock most royal archetypes, you basically will have to kind of level up what you're doing anyway, right? So she's a tank, she's a knight, so you start with, you probably have already Paladin and Dark Knight or whatever to level it up, right? So you basically already have her in this, like, almost running for Arc Knight, and then you probably already have that, and then you know, so you kind of like have to mathematically anyway, and but it's just weird because it's like, it means that everyone can combine the 3-stepper archetypes, right, at step 3, however they want, but because they only have one unique 4 each, it's just like, yeah, why wouldn't you use the 4th, right? And the 4 also be way better. For example, Royal Knight has Omni Counter. Omni Counter counters it counters everything, 15% chance, except Almighty then. Where Paladin has 2 different passives. One is 15% against physical, and Dark Knight has against magic, right? With magic counter. So this one has both of those abilities on the same thing, right? It's just like it's just a better passive. Yeah, it's very much like power creep. It's like, oh yeah, I have Omni counter. I just counter everything. These two have one. This is physical, anti-physical. This one is anti-magical, and the Royal Knight is just both. It is both on the same time, and they seem to stack also, so you can have all 3 counters. But I digress. It's just like, yeah, obviously the Royal Knight is just a way better Paladin or a way better. It's both at the same time. Yeah, it fulfills both classes at the same time, right? And also some of the mage spells from Elemental Master. So it's like, what is the point? There's no other point. I keep saying it. There's no point not playing the Royal Knight, right? And especially even more so for later characters to join your party. So the later characters join your party, they have an easier requirement to also become the Royal Knight, because they join later, right? They have lower archetype levels in total because they join like 50 hours later than the first character. So they only gonna have their own personal archetype. So they only need to have like 2 classes to become Royal. They have 3 here, right? So the last like 3 characters, they only have like 2 instead. So it's much easier for them to also become the Royal Knight. So like, why wouldn't you, right? Which means that basically everyone ends up just being the Royal Knight in the end of the game. So everything I said before, right? I like the combination, the different archetypes, the build-up, all the strategies of like, oh, should I be a mage or should I be a healer? We just have all that is thrown out the window late game. It's like no one ever is playing their ultimate role anyway. I mean, of course, you still have like your different passives and so on. So you can still have like, you have to build up your your guy. You can different passive, different abilities. Obviously, that is there. That is there to be fair. But it's just like, it's still this is not the same thing. And I think it's a massive blunder just having this thing. And the game would have been better if it didn't have this like super duper extra class per character you unlock them end of the storyline. It's just like, why? You know, user removes, like I said earlier, right? With having too many days. Same thing here. This just removes meaningful choices. And it's also kind of annoying because I had one character, and you can say this, you know, it's up to the player then, but I had one character, and he was very not spec'd for this thing. He obviously had his one main archetype, right? But he needed 2 other archetypes. I haven't touched one of them at all with him. So I was like, oh yeah, great. This guy needs to get like 45 more levels for his royal part. The other guy needs like either 0 or like 5 or something. So I was like, oh man, this guy will almost never become his Royal Knight before the game is over, basically, right? So it's also, if you replay the game from the beginning, knowing what it's gonna be, this is probably also weird for the main character, because the main character, that's such a spoiler then, but the main character's archetype has obviously a very specific stat, which is better at. So I leveled the main character. I said, right, the main character has, you can stat to make it how you want. And then I looked the royal part of the main character. I was like, oh, maybe actually I should have stacked the other thing, because the royal abilities are quite different than what I used to do. So that felt like a bummer too. But overall, my main character ended up with like max stat and everything almost anyway, so it didn't matter. Very late game, I almost had 99 in everything with the main character, so it doesn't matter too much. But it is in the primary stats then, as I needed. But it's a little weird. And also lastly on these archetype things, right? I'm not a big fan per se then, how these archetypes while you have this freedom thing until you get the royal thing. As you can see here on Stroll, because you can't level up the characters however you want, it also is kind of a weird thing, honestly. So you have like, yeah, Stroll here down, 69 strength, right, 58 endurance. He's obviously a physical dude. His magic is like half the stat of his strength, right, and agility and luck is like 40 or whatever. But you can play him as a mage if you want to, right? You can play him as a debuffer or whatever, but obviously as a mage he's gonna fail because it's like he has half the magic that his strength is. So unfortunately, even what I said earlier is true, it doesn't really work perfectly. So if you want to play like a debuffer, he can play debuffer easily with his stats, but he can't really play mage, right? I mean, he can be it, but it will be ineffective. So it's kind of annoying, but I still think what I said is true, because early game it of course matters less, right? This is like a late game now. I'm almost level 70 here, so it matters less, like more now, because, you know, more levels obviously means that the stats are more, you know, extreme, different angles. But also, like early game, it is more valuable, like I mentioned, to be a mage and throw like a fireball, right, at an ice enemy than physically hitting it for slightly more damage, but, you know, not getting extra turn, right? So early game, you can definitely play Stroll or Hulk there as a mage, just to get those like extra abilities or unlock the, you know, the fireball, and he can be a warrior with fire magic or whatever, right? That stuff is still true. It's still there, definitely early game, but it does overall feel that this game mechanic wise just gets worse the more you play it, right? And I think that's also why, even if we into other stuff here, I just can't give the game a 10 out of 10 game. It's like a 9 at best for me, because like I said, the first hours of the game is the best, really, right? Not maybe the first hours, but the first hours are good, and then when you get to like early mid game, where you have a bunch of characters and you can kind of travel around in the game more freely, you have like your vehicle basically, right, to travel around, and then the game is probably the best, because then it's not very hard game, but it's a little hard, not super hard. You have these options. This doesn't matter too much. Your primary min-max stats or whatever. You can be kind of whatever class you want, right? You have to think about how to spec the characters in different passives and so on, and that matters. But then again, when you come to late game, like early late game, and especially late game, you're kind of like, oh, I'm just like playing the perfect class now. I got infinite money, like nothing matters anymore. Yeah, so it's unfortunate, and I see it in a lot of other games too, right, where it does feel that the game definitely struggles the more you play the game. I think a lot of game has the issue, right, both on a mechanical level and also kind of like the storyline, you know what I mean? Like usually the ending is terrible because all the twists didn't make any sense or whatever, right? But I think this game here kind of shows you a typical issue with it. And I think that Persona 5, which is a game I really love, also has some issue in a similar sense, because in Persona 5, eventually you have so many personas, right, for Joker, so you can always swap into like the ultimate perfect counter, which means that the fights are very easy late game or even mid game then, but so we're mid game, the fight gets way too easy because you have so many options, right, with the Persona Joker. So it's like it removes all strategies because you always have the perfect counter basically. It's too much of a toolbox. This game here, it's kind of the opposite, right? You actually remove the toolbox, but instead you have way too higher stated characters. To be fair, to some extent in the game's defense here though, some of Stroll's strength is way higher in his magic, because obviously I only have leveled up different like strength classes, right, like the warrior and the pugilist and commander and so on. If he had leveled up like mage, and he would have had more magic and so on, a little bit at least. But I think the game would have been better overall, of course, if you could decide the stats of the characters just like the main character, right? However, I guess certainly people will be angry over that, because then they might have made Stroll a magician having like 85 magic instead now. Then you unlock the royal warrior thing, and it wouldn't work then, right? Because it's physically based only. So I understand. That's honestly probably why. I mean, I'm guessing that the side characters, the party members, I'm guessing the reason that you can't decide the stats is purely because the developers probably had it in the beginning, but then they were like, oh no, but it didn't work because people were specing them really wrong for the royal form, right? And the game got too hard then if they didn't have the royal form for the end boss and so on. But again, that's why the game shouldn't have this royal form, right? If the game didn't have this like royal warrior or royal knight or whatever, which is way too overpowered, you get away with allowing the player to spec them however you want and give them options and so on. So yeah, I think the game definitely is like a -1 from a gameplay standpoint, this whole archetype system in the end. Very unfortunate. But it feels boring because, like I said, it starts with that freedom, right? And do whatever you want. And then because of this Royal Warrior thing, it becomes like Persona 5 or whatever, right? Where everyone has their like specific class. Oh, you're playing as Queen in Persona 5? Well, she has this ability, you know. She got this like mental attack, blah, blah. Yeah, this is what she has, all has, right? The royal form basically forces them into one set class, right? Oh, you're a healer because you are a royal like savior. You have to only use healing magic, you know what I mean? And some whole abilities. But that's basically what you get, right? Like that's how you have to play the game now. It's very unfortunate. But anyway, talking a little bit about the combat system as well, more deep. Okay, so now when I come to the tactics, I felt I had to first explain the archetypes before we explain some of the deeper strategy of the game. Hope it makes any sense. But basically, for example then, Hulkenberg, right? Cute elf chick, she got the Holy Knight Proclamation, right? Which means she taunts, right? So some classes are very important to have, specifically times. I mentioned earlier, can you repel effect and so on. But for example, the fourth part of the game has really high dodge. If you dodge, or high yield dodge, if you have dodging, they miss you, they will lose more turns. So he's actually a better tank than she is. Stuff like that in the game I actually kind of like though, yeah. So yeah, thinking about that, like who has the current like elemental dodge, who has the better taunting because you want to get attacked or whatever, right? It's a lot of stuff like that, like fire dodge makes you immune to this dragon up here because it's a fire breath, right? Magic hunting gives losing them turns. Stuff like that in the game I think is really interesting. There's another archetype in the game, Summoner, which has a lot of AoE abilities. And then you have the Faker, and you have the Dancer and so on. And they have a lot of like elemental weakness setups. So one strategy I love in the game is to have, because a lot of mobs, right, is to throw like AoE fire weakness. So basically everyone gets fire weak. Then the next person has like massive severe fire AoE spells. They hit everyone, right, with like a double damage, but they're all fire weak, and you get a bunch of extra turns because, you know, the fire weak, you can spam it more, blah, blah, blah. So stuff like that in the game is really important. I want to show it here because this is like spoiler characters who have abilities. But the game has a lot of interesting, I think, mechanics, how the different archetypes can interact. Another archetype is the Berserker, which can hit the enemy and give them weakness against his own attack, which means that the next turn you hit them and you get an extra half turn, right, because you hit them into your own half turn. Then you have Synthesis. So Synthesis is that a character can combine with another archetype. This is again why I have to explain the archetype thing first, right? So depending on what archetype you have, you can combine 2 or more of them into doing new abilities. Example here then, the Paladin can combine with the Savior to do this guard, right, for everyone. As I explained earlier, if you nullify abilities from an opponent, they lose turns. This actually is one of the best tips in the game, where you can either nullify physical attack or nullify magic attack, right? This especially, Magic Guard, will nullify basically AoE abilities from the enemies. So you throw that every turn, and if the enemy does like a fire breath or whatever, you will nullify that, right? And they will lose their turn. So there's a lot of strategies here, and later on in the game, spoilers and item here, later on in the game, you also get items that will give you like, that Synthesis cost less turns, so you can do it more rapidly, or they will cost the same turns, but they will double the mana cost, but of course then they will do double damage, right? You have smaller ones that they will crit more. There are different kind of builds around it, there's so forth, right? So there's a lot of interesting items. Same thing I mentioned with the dodge thing for the 4th character. You can buy an item that makes that if you dodge and perfectly dodge it, they will lose even more turns, simple, right? And so forth. There's a lot of different builds here and options, so there's a lot of depth to it, certainly. I don't want you to think that what I said earlier with the archetype is meant that the game is too easy or whatever. My point is more that it's not that the game is like just streamlined or it's too easy. If you play it on super hard, so to speak, it is still a hard game. My problem rather is that it's streamlined in the sense, right, that every character basically has like a perfect class for them. Where you start out having all the options of you can be whatever you want, and then eventually you get stuck into being like the perfect class for you, right? You know what I mean? And like I said, you also don't have the different stats basing things, so you can't take Hulkenberg and make her a magician to some extent. She has high magic, but she doesn't have like super high magic, right? So you can do it with her, but it will always be less efficient they're taking one of the later female characters that has incredibly high magic damage, they will also gonna be a better magician than her, right? Because they have way more magic, right? So why would you do it in that order? That's the issue, right? But otherwise, the game has a lot of specs though. It has like, you can pick on items that makes you always reflect certain spells, or you can pick on items that makes your specific spell stronger. For example, the Dancer has an item that makes them like, every fire spell does way more damage, right? It won't buff the other spells, so it might sound bad, but because the Dancer also has fire dance weakness, you can like spam dance weakness into fire spell, into dance, into fire spell. So even if you only have like double fire spell damage, it doesn't matter, because you will always attack into fire weakness, because you can yourself create a fire weakness, right? So there's a lot of good builds in the game. So I just want to put it out, there is builds, and I like that. The problem, like I said, is that, well, you know, the dancer character is basically always going to be the dancer character, because she's the best dancer, right? So to speak, right? Yeah. There's no purpose for the other character to really unlock dancer, unless they have more than one dancer, right? So in the end of the game, you have a lot of different items and different builds and so on, and I keep saying I do like that a lot. You also have a bunch of different immunities, repel stuff, right? And you can do other combos too. For example, you can like give yourself repel, you can remove the enemy's weakness and make them hit themselves, like a reflect back to themselves, kind of like FF9, F12, whatever, right? Like reflecting the reflect and so on. What more can I say about the game's combo system? Well, I like that. Guarding never does anything. You can guard in the game. It basically does damage, but kind of useless. And of course, yeah, okay, lastly, of course, the game has a lot of different debuffs, right? So the game has a bunch of different debuffs, you know, it's the classic one, confusion, different dots, poison, and so on. And they get a bunch of other anxieties, like sometimes they won't follow the turn. You also get, of course, like they miss more. You have one that you can't get healed, right? Like mortal damage kind of thing. So, you know, you have a bunch of different, the classic ones, right? A bunch of different sleep and so on, yeah. Not much to say about that. However, I will say though, especially early game, you will actually have a lot of benefits you yourself using these items, especially something like Evil Eye Talisman. Reduces the opponents, all of their stats, right? So that ability in the game, they will reduce the opponent's stats. These are pretty good actually. And raising your own stats, so that is important. Here's also one thing, again, an issue in the game though. I like that the game actually has meaningful stuff with like dispelling different buffs and shields and stats and so on. However, most of the end game bosses, especially the dragon end bosses, they all have like, they do this kind of scream thing, and then they just like clean themselves immediately. So it's kind of like, it's a little bit weird, because basically, again, right, early game and mid game debuffing is really, really useful, and then late game is soft being useful because everyone is immune to it, right? But they cost them one turn out of like 8 or something, so it's like slightly useful because the boss will spend like a little bit of their turn to remove the debuffs, but not that much. And at the same time, most bosses will also remove your buffs on yourself, right? So you have abilities that give you buffs. So if I have one on this character, here for example, so you have this item here, right? If we buff all of my guys stronger, then the boss will basically immediately remove it. If it's like a dragon boss now, they will do a scream now and immediately remove this buff on everyone. So it's a little bit weird in that sense. We're like, oh, but they're immune to it anyway. Like they will do this kind of thing, and yeah, but instead they will remove all your buffs, right? So you're like, oh, okay. So I think the game has that issue, definitely. I keep saying it, right? That the game is like almost the perfect game the first like 50 hours. Then it's like, oh, everything just gets kind of less interesting. All the archetypes are streamlined. All the debuffs or buffs can't be used anymore. Yeah, it's a lot like that. And also you can see here I have cooking, right? So in your vehicle, you can spend the time in it to make cooking. However, it is a supportive character that makes cooking free actions. You can do it every day anyway. And you double the cooking, so you can do like 2 food per day, which is very useful because cooking is really good. You get a lot of good stuff here, like buffing everyone, healing everyone, all AoE damage, giving them like a 1 life, survival, health, so on, right? Lastly, this thing about dungeons then is the mana. So when you do a dungeon, the only thing that stops you from grinding in forever are mana. You lose a lot of mana basically by fighting, right? It costs a lot of spells. Early game, you will definitely run out of mana all the time. and it's very important to buy mana items. Mana items are not infinite in cities. You can only buy a few of them per city, so it's very important to always buy those few and then save them until you really need them, honestly. And the only way to get mana is that we had earlier. I have to go out in the world again. So you're out here in the world. When your allies kill something, so you can see here, right? My allies will fight them. Let's see, the AI, yeah, it's companion AI is not the best, right? There we go, they fight them, right? When they do that and succeed with that, you will gain stats or items or whatever, depending on what you are. So if I am now then a healer, I will get health. But if I am like a mage, I will get mana. So the early game, the only way to really like grind up mana is to let your NPCs basically beat them down while you are in a mage form, or you kill them while you're in a mage form and so on. The last archetype for the main character gives you both health and mana. And then there's some other ones, like if you're a thief, I think they steal item maybe sometimes or whatever, right? So that's one way to like have infinite mana in the game, is to have the mage early game. And honestly, early game, the very first dungeon, yeah, having the mage for the main character is very important, that you can get infinite mana basically by farming like that. Otherwise you run out of mana almost immediately, certainly. And I mentioned it earlier, right? When you level up the characters, you can eventually kill them in like the open world thing. That is super important sometimes. And what happens though is that currently, like now, I'm too low level then, right? If you're too high level, they will not be able to actually, force you into a fight. Instead, when they hit you like that, you will just lose health points. What happened to me actually a few times, once or twice, is that I died from that. You actually take this damage, and if the main character will take, let's say you die. It took me a few times to understand that. Yeah, first time it happened to me, I didn't understand that why I died. I was like, what? I died, but yeah, because that guy hit me for like 100 damage, then I had less health points, I died, right? But what I'm saying, it's very noticeable sometimes in dungeons. It happens a lot in this game, is that you end the dungeon, right? You start killing the enemies, and then you reach that level that you need to basically be like immune to them, to fight them. And then suddenly the dungeon is super easy because everything does one attack. Yeah, happens more than once in this game to me. Yeah, like, oh, suddenly, the enemies will have this thing here with Galika, your fairy bestie, and you can see them yellow now. Sometimes they will pop blue for you. If they're blue, you can one-shot them. And yeah, sometimes it happens during the fight, basically. You're like, oh, suddenly they all just die immediately. You're like, oh, that is almost kind of ruined the game for you. It's kind of funny, especially the last line in the game, because when they all turn blue there, no enemy ever again will fight you, so you can't fight enemies anymore. But lastly though, you can't fight them anyway, so if you do this thing, if you actually just press the triangle, you will fight them anyway, no matter if you want to or not. It's a side note, because I actually entered a few dungeons in the early game, and I couldn't fight anything, because I was too high level. So I couldn't get the items I wanted, so I had to press triangle to fight them in a bad fight. But anyway, let's talk about all stuff in the game, like the art. Let's talk about the art in the game. Now, I want to say that the game has straight up probably the best unique art this year, right? Probably easy to win 10 out of 10 art direction of the year. However, the art is heavily based on this thing called Earthly Delight, Hieronymus Bosch. And I mean, if you compare this thing here, right? This is his painting then. And then look at the game painting, it is almost exactly the same. Like, this looks almost exactly, literally the same thing. This is his straight back, image by image, right? It's almost the same thing. Now, if you ignore that, I think easily the game has like the best unique art this year, easily. But I have to say, honestly, I'm a little bothered by this. I have to admit it. Even though I love the game, the art is amazing in the game, the monsters are really crazy, it's like human enemies are really, really crazy. You can't still overlook this thing, right? Because not only is this enemy here, right, basically exactly this enemy here, is almost exactly the same thing, but you also have the ear enemy behind you. There's a boss in the game as well, right? So the helmet guy, not a human enemy. So basically the game is filled with these human enemies. They're mostly like human/chicken enemies, and they definitely remind me, of course, of Attack on Titans and most of course Deviants, right? So, and that is also something I will just in the story later. But there is a really weird thing that the main character's race is called Eldian, and it's also called Eldian Attack on Titan, and they look a lot like Titans. But anyway, let's just assume that they never seen artists before, nor ever read or watched Attack on Titan. I'm just kidding. Obviously they have. And there's no problem with, I think, obviously a game being inspired by art or whatever, right? Every game is inspired by some other art, right? But I have to say, put the wet blanket on it. Honestly, like, I think this game has the best art this year. I think in a way this game should win, art direction of the year, right? It has amazing enemy, especially the baby enemy, if you play the game I'm talking about. It has really, really amazing art, but at the same time, knowing that half the human enemies are just like literally strictly from a painting, makes it feel very uncreative, right? It actually feels like lazy and creative. Honestly, I'm honestly struggling. I still think from a product standpoint, this is the best art this year. But at the same time, I know that they have basically almost no creativity, but just copied all the interesting art, more or less, from a painting. I'm just like, huh. But again, from a pure production, or like, this is the end result, right? This is probably the best art of the year. It's honestly, I struggle. I don't know what to say, really. If I never knew his art was... If I didn't know that all the art was from this painting, then I would be, say, easily, 10 out of 10 best art this year, right? I think the problem, honestly, mostly, isn't just that, they were inspired by this painting and this crazy idea of like this like egg human guy with people inside of him and so on. Like, whatever, they can be inspired by that. That's fine if one boss was like this. But then you look at that painting and you see that, the egg enemy, like the guy that's like a living egg with an eye inside of it, is also in that painting. The guy with like a helmet on is in the painting. The fish enemy, especially also in that painting. So it's like, it's like almost every enemy of this like human are in this painting. You're like, so it's like 80% of the unique enemies are actually not unique at all. I don't know, what do you guys think? But seriously, it does bother me a lot. Otherwise, I would say the game easily has the best art this year. I still think it has the best art this year, right? Again, from like a productional standpoint, like the actual end of it. But knowing the true history of it does bother me. And also, as I mentioned, comment more later, but it really bothers me with the storyline and Attack on Titan as well, because it's very similar to Attack on Titan. Like, name by name, story bits, it feels way too similar. It's also, for me at least, made me immediately, guess what's going to happen in the storyline, right? But anyway, some more art bits that I have to talk about. It's also, of course, the general monster design, like dragon and so on. So as I said, first we have these like really unique looking human enemies then, which are mostly human and chicken or the birds. And some of them are like fish stuff, like kraken, one is like a bug, but most of them are bird/human, right? But otherwise we have, of course, dragons, we have skeletons, right? We have some slime enemies. So it's basically, all the enemies are your, generic fantasy monsters, right? Which is fine. I'm not saying it's bad. I'm just saying that they all look, they look okay. Nothing, honestly, not much to comment there, right? It's a dragon, guys, you know what I mean? It looks what you kind of expect, right, from a fantasy world. And in that sense, the game, but I kind of like it in that sense though, because we're Persona games, right? Compared to all other games, they have all these weird monsters from mythology and this weird mixture of stuff, right? And Persona games are more like mental, so they have more, weird like manifestation of destiny or whatever, or nightmares or whatever, right? And some god stuff. In this game instead, you have, like I said then, basic, normal monster like a dragon, right? It's a dragon, okay, look at a dragon. And then you have this like really freaky human guys. So in that sense, again, I'm interested here, while the human guys are, of course, all taken basically from that painting, they still have used them really well, because they really stick out more. If those human guys were in a Persona game, they would be less of an impact, because, again, the other monsters are kind of weird. But here instead it's like, we have a normal dragon, so to speak, a basic dragon, right? And the next boss is some kind of weird giant baby thing. You're like, what? So those enemies really stick out. But I think it's that if you had more art like the baby boss, then I would be more impressed, honestly, right? Because the baby boss is more like it's more their design to it, and story-wise based on the actual creator in this game. So it's a little bit on and off in that sense. But I think the contrast, right, the positioning of these really weird humans with the normal, like Dungeons and Dragons monsters, works really well. Or rather, it makes it really off-putting, but in a good way, right? It's like disgusting in a good way, You want to be, it's like surströmming. You want to enjoy the pain, so to speak. So that's really great. Now, the rest of the game is talking about purely like character design. I'm not going to go into the storyline yet then, but like, you know, how they look, I think also looks really good. The different characters, your party members. I'm not going to show it here because I'm going to spoil for you guys, right? But basically, as in basically every other JRPG, you will obviously pick up like one per race, right? Okay, I don't think it's a spoiler because it's basically how it always is, right? So you have one elf chick and one ogre, one, you know, you basically pick up one person per race basically, and they all look great, and they have different. And actually, I think that they have done a pretty good job, generally speaking, here on designing different races. I think it's pretty well done here, right? You have the Paripus, which is like a kind of furry werewolf girls. You have some weird like bat people or something in figures. You have the elf-looking guys, which are obviously just elves, but they call something else. But you have the bird people, and you have the shrinking, and so there's a bunch of different creatures and races, which I think all look pretty good, honestly, in the game, right? They basically have taken classic like D&D character races and changed them slightly, right? And some of them are completely new. So I think the game does pretty well in that aspect. And generally speaking, the dungeons are... I think it was a hard part, okay, honestly. The dungeons, at first glance, a little bit fine. The story one dungeons, they're pretty fine. However, the optional dungeons are all pretty terrible. Like straight up, okay. Straight up. Not from a level design standpoint, from a gaming design standpoint, it's fine. Combat standpoint. But from an art standpoint, the optional dungeons, there are far too many of them. All like you see in the middle image here is green. Okay, some green dungeon, run around some green cave. Sometimes there are red caves, but they all have the exact same models, the same art pieces. Basically, it's a hue, it's either red or green or whatever. And it's like 10 dungeons like that. They're all really ugly, honestly. They look really unfinished. Even worse, though, is that in the last part of the game, you have to not only replay one dungeon, no, 5 dungeons, okay? So, see me. You have to replay 5 goddamn dungeons at the end of Metaphor. It's just terrible. It's just terrible. So 3 dungeons were optional earlier are then reused again as optional dungeons. And then a main story dungeon, which is really long, is optional for after you beat Dota 3. And then one of the first dungeons in the game are reused as the last dungeon. So in the last part of the game, the last month, you have to again replay 5 total dungeons. And that was just really bad. It felt like, oh my god, no budget anymore. Like, I'm just assuming that the company, unfortunately, gave them no more money, because it's like, man, they just reuse the same thing there. And on the art as well, the enemies are also too few, okay? It's very clear that the Minotaur enemy has the exact same technical animation as the ogres, 100%. Stuff like that, right? There are too many enemies that are clearly used different like reskins of the same thing. So not only do you have like a wolf and then a red and blue wolf or so on, right? But you have like a wolf, and then you have like a cat that's the same, so to speak, technical animation. Basically, is that they're the same rigging and so on, right? And maybe only I see that because I work too much for this stuff, but it's like there's very few unique enemies in the game. Basically, all the big enemies, like the giant enemies, the giant ogres, minotaurs, anything that stand on 2 legs or very big, all have the exact same rigging. So it's like 20 different enemies. They all have the exact same code, basically, and the same like technical animation, technical rigging, and it looks really, really like lazy. Honestly, is my word for it. But I'm guessing it's just budget. Honestly, right? I think it's budget, but it's extremely obvious that too many stuff are overlapping like that. And I think it goes back to what I said earlier, right? That the game is like 10 out of 10 for the first maybe 60-70%, right? And then you get to the end of it, like I said, right? You have to replay 5 dungeons, which is terrible for the last month there. But also, of course, after a while, you kind of understand that, oh, they're just reusing the exact same enemy model and rigging over and over again, right? So the game only has like 4 or 5 enemies. Yeah, it's so obvious after a while. And then the human boss enemies, they look really unique and are cool and are weird, right? They are also reused as normal enemies later, or as optional bosses. So it's like, I think the game only has like 6 or so human boss enemy, like boss version, and then they always reuse them later again. So they also feels kind of lazy, honestly. You just kind of like, oh, are you gonna like give me something new? So I really think the game should have had more time in the oven or have more budget, right? I do think it mostly is classic user game development, where it's like, well, we want to have this many optional dungeons, right? because I have to reuse them because we don't have time to make more of them. So I get it. I don't think it makes the game terrible. Like I said, I don't think the game is like 0 out of 10, but I think it's very much clear to me that I keep saying the further you play the game, the more you see like, oh, they reused that. Oh, that's the same boss again. Oh, that's the same bird enemy but with another skin again. Like it gets very, very draining after a while. I still enjoy the game, of course, as I'm negative now, but I think it's very fair to say that, especially when it comes to the art, the game is obviously under budgeted. Yeah, super obvious when it comes to art. The dungeons, they have the same color scheme all the time. Dungeon with the same what's called decor, and the dungeons then with are usually same dungeons again. Otherwise, the level design of dungeons are fine, but not just how they are made and so on. But anyway, it's about the music in the game then. So you can hear me have the music playing in the background right. This game has really good music, and I think that even though I'm harsh on the art there, but I think it's what I said is true, is that I really like the art in the game, also the human art, of course, but eventually it gets a little bit like, oh, this is the same thing over and over again. The music is also fantastic, and I think the combination of this really cool, like kind of badass gospel action fighting music with the cool human design enemies, with the crystal storyline, really gives you an amazing, great experience, right? So the music is 10 out of 10 too. This game or Stellar Blade, I think it has the best music this year, and the team is great. It's just great, and the combination of those two are a really good experience. I think, just like I said earlier, that when it comes to the art, then you get a little bit like, you get a little tired of it eventually, right? Yeah, it's a little bit like the music on the head is just 10 out of 10 the whole game through. Yeah, the music is easily 10 out of 10 all the way through. Honestly, I have like no complaints. I think the music is almost like perfect. Great battle team, great boss music, good villains music, good soundtrack, like generally for smaller stuff. Like I said, the music is seriously like almost perfect. Like I don't know what to say really. The music is perfectly fitting what happens in the game, right? It's just that the art could have been more diverse there. However, one thing lastly about art/music then, presentation, which is really good in the game as well, is of course the UX design. So the UX design and the UI, of course, in the game is also fantastic, right? And this is something that I think that people just underestimate with Persona games. Even people mention all the time Persona games, UX or whatever. But honestly, I am very impressed by this thing, even though I played like all the previous games. But I love it, right? Immediately here, the text kind of popping out, different banner behind it. So you have this thing here, right? The box behind your text is popping, also in color, right? Most games have the same color for that. You can see how the thing on the side is moving as well. And when you change now like calendar, right, you can see different stuff here. It's moving. You can see how the background is changing. But at the memoriam, you see how it's popping from the sideline. Like this thing is longer. It's like this alive, right? Thing is like moving on the sideline. You know what I mean? Like something's always happening, right? Like it's just an amazing UI, honestly, because it's always something that's happening all the time, right? When I look on the side there, you see different photos, paintings, and all, right? It's always like something that's popping up as well as the game. No, but I mean, it sounds kind of silly to some people, but I am always genuinely, obviously super impressed by this thing, honestly, because you see, imagine this thing here, right? You see the shoes kind of like looking down when you're walking, and compare that against system when you see it like that, right? Like stuff like that is just amazing. And when you like every day, when you finish the day, right, you see the prince lying there cursed, and the clock is like moving around him, and stuff like that. And like in the battle, you have this flying rock of the king. He's in the top of the battle fight, so you see kind of his face when you're flying and so on, right? It's all of this stuff that I really love in the game. So again, the UX side of the game is like 10 out of 10. UI, so it's so alive, right? So alive. When you like defeat the enemies, you get like the stats, right? Like you got XP and so on. Then you see your party members like moving the weapons, turning off the power and so on, like in background. So it's all stuff like that, right? So here, since the game is amazing as always, seriously. It's almost hard to explain how good it is, but I love it. And this thing here, right, it's just like, this is your stats. Do you increase that in the game, of course? But see how it makes a crown, right? So the main character's face, of course, is kind of top in the middle of it, which is his brain, right, his personality. But it's also turned into a crown, or like a sun, but I would say it's a crown, right? So stuff like that. It's just like a really good, there's so much of these like details. Like seriously, I just really love this UX. It's like the 10 out of 10 UI UX sign metaphor. If anything, it should win this thing. Yeah, it's incredible when it comes to board. Finally, yeah, the storyline, right? The actual writing of the game. And here, of course, will be the only real spoiler part, right? That's really hard to like review a storyline. But let me first say that like, is storyline good? I think storyline is pretty good. So you can say that without spoiling. It's like 8 out of 10 maybe in storyline in total. But anyway, I won't bother with doing this like, oh, let's go into it. Let's go into it. Okay, so first of all, you're gonna save the prince, of course, right? There's a main story aspect. Lewis, then, see the image here, he's the main antagonist, and he has cursed the prince in the past, right? Like 10 or so years before storyline starts. And if you don't kill him, the prince will die, right? Now, they're having this, like, race then, mentioned earlier, to become the new king, right? And you enter the race to basically get close to Lewis, so you can assassinate him, right? Rather than winning the race. Here, I think immediately, the storyline is actually, I won't say bad, but it's kind of obvious or predictable, right? It's like, why would you join the race to become the new king, but it's actually about killing Lewis, say the prince? Sure, but it's kind of like anyone with, you know, IQ over 2, right, will understand that obviously winning the race will be the end goal, right? Saving the prince is gonna be the by-effect, because you have to say win the race to stop Lewis or the other racers, right, to, you know, take over the planet, right? So it's kind of weird. Honestly, I felt it kind of weird because I don't think anyone actually thinks that saving the prince will be how the game ends, right? It doesn't make any sense. And because of that reason, and I'm throwing out the immediate spoilers now, here comes spoilers. For that reason, I actually figured out pretty early playing the game that Lewis was not the person that cursed the prince, right? You know what I mean? Because the reason is that you have to save the prince, right, before you take care of Lewis. You know what I mean? Because, as I said, right, saving the prince, there's no way that would be the end goal of the storyline. Saving the planet, right, fighting God, you know, would be the end part of the storyline. So I actually found the storyline quite predictable, because I could very early figure out that, well, there's no way, I keep saying here, right, that Lewis actually cursed the prince, so we have to kill Lewis, right, before we fight some other bad guy. But he's clearly the game's true antagonist. That means that someone else had to have cursed the prince. So I was like, oh, it's full run, and then it's realized. So I was on the money that immediately. And I also figured out that he wasn't, that he had picked his race too. But I was just like, yeah, so that thing to me was very, very predictable. But worse though, there's something I've said before, say it again, right? I think it's very, very strange, honestly, that the race you have as a main character is Eldan. And I know it's because Eld means like old or whatever, so, right? The oldest race. But obviously, that is almost pronounced exactly like Eldian in Attack on Titan. In Attack on Titan, spoilers not Titan, you know that Eldians becomes humans, right? They become Eldians, transform, and become Titans, right? And in this game, Eldians transform and become giant humans. It's very, very similar. So when Lewis is like, let me show you how a human is created, I immediately knew he was going to make the main character transform into a giant human titan, right? So again, I think the storyline is pretty good, but it feels very predictable, and especially that part where it's like, why are they using almost the exact same name as Attack on Titan, more or less same name, and they have a very similar backstory later on, and they have a very similar like look how they transform into these weird deviant titans. You know, like, I mean, immediately, the first hour of the game, when I saw the human looking at Titans, and I knew that everyone hates the Eldians, I was like, well, it's probably because the Eldians are the humans, right? I assumed immediately that I, as a main character, could transform into a giant human, ergo a giant Titan, right? Because the storyline and the naming is so similar to Attack on Titan. And it's no way, I refuse to believe the developer of this game has not, of course, seen and read Attack on Titan. After all, one of the biggest mech anime of all time, and then naming these races almost same thing as Attack on Titan, and having a similar storyline and similar powers, I think is way too much on the nose, right? It kind of spoiled too much of a twist for me. But that's a bad part of the storyline. Otherwise, I like the characters, I like your party members, I like you pick up them during the storyline. Basilius is my favorite. No, but he was cool. He's his brother. That was like the classic picking up. Not like a bad guy, but you know, a little bit of antagonist. I like his main storyline, but he's like a dead son and so on, right? So there's a lot of good side stories for the characters. Stroll is a classic big bro, and I will help you forever, best friend, right? And overall, of course, that you always were the prince. So again, obviously the spoilers now, yeah. The main character saves himself, right? I like that. I did, again, assume it was something like that. because I keep saying it, I think the storyline is pretty good, but I think it's too predictable, right? So, like I said earlier, I felt that, well, obviously you will save the prince before this thing, and then having gained all the supporters and followers and so on, I was like, unless the prince is like a secret party member, you are the prince, right? You know what I mean? It's a little bit like game mechanics, but like, well, there's no more spots for the game, right? And you have to be the prince then. And this kind of weird, this story element that you don't actually like remember who you are, and you have like the hints are pretty clear, I think, because it's like, oh, I have no memories. Galika is like, oh, let's go, guy that I barely know for some reason, and it's very much clear that you have like amnesia or something, right? And then of course the game later explains that you were created by yourself, like you are the prince, and then you created like a living, magical version of yourself, right? To go out and explore and save yourself, basically, from your like imprisonment curse thing. And then that also explains why Yufa could talk to you, because she can talk to like dragons and they're pure magic, and you were a pure magic being, so you can communicate with her telepathically, right? So it all kind of made sense for a long time there. But to be fair though, I think in the beginning of the game, you were also played off as this typical protagonist that has no idea what's happening, and everyone has to explain to you stuff, right? To help the player. So to some extent, it felt like, oh, I'm just a super protagonist. They have to explain to me everything. But it also felt like, it seemed like purposely how little the main character seemed to know about stuff. So, you know what I mean? So it's a little bit like that. But overall, yeah, I kind of assumed that I was the prince from the beginning. But I kind of liked the twist still, though. I wasn't completely sure on it, but I assumed it was that. And then how they kind of merged, you were lying. So in the storyline, you kind of eventually, mid-game or so, you kind of lie and say that you are the prince to get more votes, etc., right? But then you actually are the prince. You didn't remember it. So I liked that. That was a good twist, kind of in a cute way. It's like, we're pretending that I am the prince so we can win this election against Real and against Lewis. That's like, actually, I am the prince. So I think that was really good. So like I said, I think the storyline is like 7 out of 10, 8 out of 10. I give it like a -1 at least for being predictable. Absolutely. But it's like, overall, pretty good storyline. Now, Lewis, as the antagonist, love this guy. He's a great antagonist. He really owns every part of him. He's the best part of the game. Of all the characters, Lewis is definitely the best character. And he is probably the year's best antagonist. I played like almost every role-playing game this year, right? Played the Yakuza, the Sega, whatever, Stellar Blade and whatever, so on, right? Elden Ring and so on. But I think Lewis is like easily best antagonist this year. He's a very good character, and he's very sympathetic too. You kind of feel like he obviously goes crazy eventually over the game. So he turns into God, right? Because he's like he has turned into evil God. But until that point, most of what he says kind of makes sense. He's just like, no, like the government is evil. He'll be like, no, this religion is evil. So yeah, you're like, you know what? He kind of makes a little sense, this guy. Yeah, so he's very like charismatic, right? And he basically has half the people following him blindly because he's the strongest guy and everyone likes him and so on. And I also like how you as the player have the archetypes, right? And when you fight him as a final boss battle, he also does like, oh, I have my own archetype. And he's like, haha! He has his own other class. You can't have evil classes. I'm like, yeah, that's good. I wish there was more on that. Actually, one thing I did lack though was that when he transforms into his archetype, he has an other kind of transformation. I would love if he did the same thing as you do. So all the character, they have this like, they have their own heart, and then they scream into the heart like, oh, I am the warrior kind of thing. He is transforming into his form. He should have the same thing, but I guess in the storyline, it makes sense that he actually had, of course, unlocked his powers before he fought you, I suppose. But actually, I think that actually, I'll say it, that was a great story bit too, because he's like the strongest guy, right? Except you, of course, then. But when the storyline starts, he's the best guy ever. And people understand how strong he is, and people understand how you can use archetypes, right? Everyone else using initiators to use magic, but you can use magic without them, right? And Lewis, likewise, also has like a rumor he can use magic without using magic items. So there's a clearly implication he's actually also like you, an Eldian from the Alien village and using archetypes, right? So all the hints are there, and you kind of figure out, like I said, I assumed he was faking his race. I was correcting that. So I guess keep saying, I like the storyline overall, great antagonist, overall great companions, and also I like how the main character speaks. he's not a mute protagonist. He will comment stuff. You have different options, right? You can say A, B, or C, and then he will say the line you picked, basically, with maybe some extra words afterward. I like that a lot, actually. I like that you can, pick your own yes or no or so on forth, right? But I think that adding that extra lingo afterward, I think is great. Also, for that matter, when you have dates and so on, right, with your companions, I like how this game, instead of Persona games, if you fail, so basically, if your girlfriend asks something right, you have like 3 options. In Persona games, if you pick the wrong option, you like either can you lose romance, but you get like 1 to 3, like how much romance you gain, right? In this game instead, you always get maximized like romance plus points, but you get different mag points. And mag are basically like, XP, like, resource to buy new skills, right? I think that's a much better way to do it. So if you have a proper date, right, you land all the dating questions correctly and so forth, right, yada yada, you get a lot of extra mag points, which is great. But if you fail the date, you still get some mag points, and you still like successfully kind of finish the romance bit, right? Which means you don't have to reload. Because when I play Persona games, if I fail a date, then I will reload, right? I'll be like, I have to reload this date. I don't want to have just like 1 out of 3, romance points, right? This game instead, I felt that I do want to have more mag points, especially early game actually matters, but like late game, it doesn't matter whatsoever. So if you fail a date, you still get like 1 plus romance, right? You're like, whatever, I missed like 1,000 mag points, like whatever. And then honestly, it's just much better because you will, I think I at least do, you can, you scum save and you reload to get the better date, you know what I mean? Otherwise, and I think this system here is much better. All the conversations, the character speaking, and you can just kind of ignore it if you fail. It's like whatever, you're good enough, I think it's a much better system than having to like constantly reload otherwise. Now, lastly, does the game have romance or not? First of all, honestly, I think it's very clear that this game is supposed to have romance. The reason it doesn't have romance, right? And the director said it before the game was released. Oh, there's no romance. I think again is a budget reasoning why, right? You have clearly romantic scenes, especially this character here, Eufa, also with Yuna and Hulkenberg to some extent as some other characters, but especially the 2 later party members, female party members, Yuna and Yuna have a lot of clear romantic scenes, right? Especially here that Eufa has a scene where she grabs your hand and she explains to you that this hand thing she's doing with you is like more than sex. It's like deeper than, this is like only married couple do this thing in my culture. This is like, 11th base, oh yeah, we're doing it now, let's do it again, she's like, you're basically my husband now, right? How can you say this doesn't have romance where she literally is like, we're married now, more or less? She's like, she's like, in my culture, you're my husband now, basically. And she brings it to her brother, and she's like, oh yeah, this guy's my boyfriend now, kind of thing, and so on, right? He's like, protect my sister, blah, blah. So it's like, you clearly basically are married to her, at least in her perspective, right? And Yuna also shows you her, like, secret naked body and all this stuff. Yuna undresses for you and shows you her true body shape and all this stuff, right? So you clearly have, like, romantic scenes with both Yuna and Eufa, 100% in this game. And I think the only reason Metaphors doesn't have like actual like confirmed romance, right, is because if they had that, they would have to of course add some extra cutscene or release some extra in the end, right? So because the game seeming really have like low budget, they probably didn't want to have like romantic finishers. They would have to add 1 per female character basically, right? Which is a lot of extra work. So, and because Persona games are much more into that, I guess they just felt like, oh, we just don't do that. We don't have time or money for that, right? But it seems really weird because at least 2 of the female characters are clearly in love with you, and they're clearly like, oh yes, touch my tra-la-la, basically, right? When you reach them further into the romance with them. And Hulkenberg is like yandere or something like Hulkenberg is like obsessed with you, right? She's like, oh my prince, I will die for you. So obviously you can marry her if you want easily if you had romance options, because she's willing to die for you anyway before the game starts, obsessed with you. And then the other female character like Birgitta clearly likes you and so forth, right? Most of the other ones are also like, yeah, they probably would smash you, right? But yeah, like especially these 2 party members are like clearly has romantic scenes with you, and it just feels like I think a bad reason why. And it is kind of silly that the game, even though the director is like, no, there is no romance scenes, when Yuna like cabedons you, etc. Yeah, it's like there's a bunch of romance scenes in the game. You just doesn't have that classic like after beating the game, you can pick one wife, or, you know, depending on who you charm the most, they will marry you and you get an extra cutscene for that or whatever. The game is lacking that, yes, but it clearly has several romantic scenes. So it's a little bit like, I keep saying it, I feel it is probably pure budget, and if they ever release, you know, like a real version, right, like a remake, you know what I mean, a real version, so to speak, right? They probably will release one day an update right in a few years from now with more dungeons and so on, then I'm sure they're gonna add romantic ending scenes to these female characters that I mentioned now, at least the 3 party members, Hulkenberg, Yuna, and Eva will definitely marry you in the end, and Brigitte also probably, and so on, right, and some other characters, but yeah, maybe Katarina as well, and so on. Maybe. She also is kind of love with you in the end, I guess. But I will agree there that maybe some of the supporter characters aren't as romantically into you as tend to be in the Persona games, but I keep saying at least your party members will absolutely marry you in the end. And the game even kind of ends with them basically being in your party forever. Hulkenberg is like, you know, she's like obsessed with you, right? She's your Mikasa, so to speak. Yeah, she's like, I will stay with you forever, my king, prince, and do my body right now, you know. Yeah, she's like, I'm here for you forever. My body is your body, you know. Like, okay, sure. She's like, well, you know, even if you marry any other character, Hulkenberg is basically your bonus wife anyway, right? But anyway, that's kind of it of the full review, guys. What do you guys think of the video? Please, you know, subscribe, slap and so on, right? Now to end there, I'm gonna give the game a final, of course, score, and the score is like a 9 for me, a solid 9. I have to say that I almost gave it an 8, so I don't want to hear say, oh, it should be a 10. No. I think that I have explained very well here in this video why the game is only a 9, and honestly, it almost maybe should only be an 8. I don't think it's the best game this year. I think it's a very good game, but like I've said, right, several times in this video, even though I like the game just falters too much in the end, right? So my final score for ReFantazio is a 9 out of 10, because the game is like amazing. It's like an 11 out of 10 game for the first maybe 60-70% of the game, right? But the last 30-20% of the game is way worse. You have lost so much meaningful choices. The archetypes are completely imbalanced. They're reusing 5 dungeons, right? They're out of new enemy designs and art designs, so they're reusing all the enemies. Like the last 20 or so hours are way worse in the game than the previous, 50-40 hours you had up to that point, right? So the game really lost steam in the end of it. And honestly, it's not the storyline. A lot of games have terrible endings, right? This game actually, I like the ending of the storyline. It's more everything else, like the art design, the level design, the combats, the abilities. You kind of lost steam on all those parts, right? It's very noticeable how it really feels like it should be at least one more dungeon in the game in the last month there. It should be something else happening. It should be like 10 days, another boss, 10 other days, the last boss. Something like that. It should be more conclusive. It just feels like something's lacking in the end there. And they should have balanced the archetypes better, way better. And hopefully if they make a remake, a Royal a few years from now, they're gonna like fix that stuff so maybe everyone can be every Royal class, free stats, and obviously more diverse enemies, right? Because the game really kind of loses steam, I think, from a game mechanical standpoint. Like I said, in the last 10-20 hours of the game. Maybe even more than that. But fun enough, so to speak, it actually keeps the storyline and the comedy, the humor, that stuff is still intact though, right? Actually, right? Because honestly, I think a lot of games and also shows, right, are usually opposite, where the gameplay is better and better late game, but like the storyline is terrible or whatever. Yeah. But this game I actually felt that now as the gameplay, the combat, right, they started to lack in the last bit, and the storyline kept me still engaged, learning about the truth in the backstory. And I mean, obviously, it's like Earth transformed into fantasy world or whatever, right? That was very obvious. Shinyaku, that was super obvious. But like, still, even though it was obvious, I liked it. So it was just kind of the gameplay started to lack. And obviously then, as I mentioned, the art design is sort of feeling. I like the art design, but now you have to have something new coming, right? And now it's the same enemy over and over and over again. It was very obvious that they probably ran out of budget. Like I said, with the Romans as well, right? They probably had no money left in the end there. Which also would explain then why, of course, you would reuse so many dungeons, right? So forth, right? But anyway, guys, have a great day, and I'll see you in the next video.